Hi, and welcome everyone to another RIS interview where we bring you the story behind the cutting edge research that made it into our journal, the Review of International Studies. Today, I'm delighted to be talking to Bohdana Kurylo, who is a PhD candidate at University College London in the School of Slavonic and East European Studies. Bohdana has an article in the Review of International Studies on counter-populist performances of insecurity, feminist resistance in the face of right-wing populism in Poland. Very warm welcome to you, Bohdana, and congratulations on the article.
Thanks so much, Juliet, for the introduction. And I also wish to thank the entire RIS editorial team for such a fantastic publishing experience.
Oh, that's great to hear. Good. Thank you for that. So let's start straight away. And let me start by asking you a little bit about your academic journey, how you ended up becoming interested in this particular area of research.
Right, so my academic journey has been centered around three main areas of interest, which all combined have motivated me to write this paper. So first of all, in my PhD, I look at the role of civil society groups in the politics of security. And I look at how new collective security actors can emerge from the ground up, and also look at the way their understandings and practices of security can help us reimagine security in new ways. So this is how I came to be interested in the ongoing events in Poland, where an ideologically polarized civil society has generated a number of opposing security discourses that lead everyday actors to undertake collective action and, try to reformulate the way we see security. So that was the first one. Secondly, I've also had a long-standing interest in populism, to which I dedicated my previous article on populism as a securitization style. And there I argued that the construction of securitization issues is inherent in populism, and that populism has a distinctive discourse and aesthetics of security. But above all, this new paper has been driven by the contextualist approach to security, which I undertake in my PhD, and which is inspired by the work of my supervisor, Felix Chuta. So according to the contextual line of thinking, both security and populism can take different forms depending on the context and agents involved. Hence, while my previous research highlighted that there is this intimate relationship between populism and security, I was also interested in looking at how populism, how this relationship plays out in different contexts and with different agents. So in other words, how would the populist discourse and perhaps the aesthetics of security change if we look beyond right-wing populism in Western context? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So can you just give us a brief outline of the article and just go through the sort of main arguments and ideas within it?
Yes, so the paper re-examines the relationship between populism, security, and feminism. And this relationship has typically been viewed in a negative light. So, for example, IR scholars are increasingly showing that populists around the world are increasingly mobilizing discourses of insecurity to construct gender ideology as a threat to the people. So unsurprisingly, populism has been judged to be an obstacle to feminist politics. And my case study of Poland and especially the Law and Justice Party certainly exemplifies this. Still, what I saw when looking at the Polish case study is that there were feminist agents on the ground in local settings that were attempting to transform this relationship between populism, security, and feminism. So therefore, this paper focuses on the case of feminist resistance and what it has done to populism, to how it has reimagined it. So I look at the protests that were taking place in late 2020 against the near total ban on abortion. And specifically, I focused on the women's strike pro-choice movement. What particularly interested me here is that feminist resistance was not simply aimed at dismantling populism and its appeals to security. Instead, I demonstrate that the movement has tried to subvert right-wing populist imaginaries of security by reappropriating certain elements of populism to establish the feminist people as an alternative subject and referent of security. So my key argument is that in the very process of feminist resistance, the movement was able to inaugurate counter-populist politics of security, and in doing so, it introduced an alternative discourse and aesthetic of security. Yeah, that's the key point.
So what then makes this particular pro-choice movement populist? And how do you define that? How do you define populism?
Okay, so I'll start with the second question. I define populism as a performative enactment of the political subject of the people against the elite. And I also claim that this process, this enactment, tends to entail embodied collective performances of us in danger. My starting point was the performative approach to populism, which sees it as a style of doing politics, as a mode of political performance. And it focuses on not only what populists say about the people, but also the aesthetic ways through which populists enact the people, bringing this subjectivity into being. In my turn, I emphasize that the construction of the people, of us, the people, involves the identification of that which threatens us, right? Us, the people, our interests. And this is how the construction of insecurity comes into play in populism. So keeping this definition in mind, there are three reasons which I provide to support my argument that the women's strike was a case of populist feminism. So first of all, I argue that its participants tend to present themselves as ordinary women that and speak in the name of and for the people. Secondly, I also noticed that the movement participants tend to articulate this dichotomy between us, the people, and the elite. And here the elite refers both to the ruling party as well as the ultraconservative groups in civil societies that have set the agenda for the tightening of the abortion law. And lastly, I noticed that the movement is characterized by the performance of people in danger. So the discourse of security is very much present in this case. But while trying to apply, or rather implement, the performative approach, I also found it to be insufficient for fully capturing this kind of populism, populist feminism, right? So the problem was that populism continued to be associated with personalistic male leaders, passive audiences, Western contexts, and also quite normatively negative visions of security. So in my paper, I therefore shift the focus towards studying how the subject of the people is collectively enacted by those who are usually considered to be populist audiences. That is, everyday agents that participate in this kind of movements. And for this purpose, I also expand the performative approach by incorporating Judith Butler's theory of embodied and plural performativity to illustrate the role that public assemblies in particular play in the self-constitution of the people.
So your interpretation of populism emphasizes the importance of collective performances of insecurity. Could you give me an example of what constitutes that sort of performance in the Polish context?
Yeah, of course. So in order to explore how security is differently enacted by different populist movements, I try to juxtapose two competing performances of insecurity. So on the one hand, I looked at the Independence March, which is an annual mass rally that happens on the Poland's Independence Day and is organized by far-right groups with support of the ruling party. Through such performances, I try to explain how right-wing populists depicted the people as under threat and have tried to symbolically defend them against imaginary enemies. So I argue that in the process, a particular identity of the people was formed as white, Catholic, heteronormative, and socially conservative. On the other hand, there was a different type of feminist performance, or rather a series of performances that took place during the women's strike protests, which I mentioned earlier. in response to the tightening of the abortion law. And here I analyze how the feminist people were constructed through acts such as collectively claiming public spaces, occupying churches, renaming streets, and even through the exposure to police violence. I argued that through such acts, the movement participants were making claims to security in the conditions where the women were denied basic healthcare rights. So by drawing a comparison between these two movements, I showed that right-wing populist performances were different from, of course, the feminist ones, because the right-wing movement placed an emphasis on hypermasculinity, heroism, seriousness, and used a variety of national and religious symbols. So in contrast, the aesthetic of the women's strike put an emphasis on vulnerability, vulgar humor, and it also had exhibited this inappropriate use of national and religious symbols as a way of perhaps ridiculing the right-wing aesthetic. So by celebrating those elements that would typically be considered as aesthetic deficiencies in the eyes of the right-wing elite, the movement attempted to disrupt and destabilize the right-wing imaginaries of security by playfully laying claim to security in the face of its denial, practically. Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned that populist actors can operate with different meanings of security. Could you just elaborate a little bit on that, on how is it the women's strike movement understood security in contrast to right-wing populist actors?
Yeah, so that's right. And I'll begin with the right-wing movement. So in the case of the right-wing populism, I argued that the discourse of security drew on a highly gendered narrative of ontological security. And according to it, Polish national identity was said to be endangered by the so-called gender ideology. The reproduction of the Polish nation and the restrictions imposed on women's reproductive rights were justified as necessary for the preservation of national identity, the preservation of the nation as such. So in contrast, my analysis of the interviews with the women's strike groups revealed that security was not only present in their discourses, but it was also re-articulated in a more emancipatory language that echoed the concept of livable life, which I also borrowed from Judith Butler's work. And here the movement tried to show that women's bodies are not disposable and they require infrastructural conditions of living, such as, of course, the access to reproductive health care. And the idea of livable life was meant to call into question the conception of life that is to be secured. So from life as mere existence and survival, and security as mere survival, the attention shifted to the need to secure the conditions that maximize the flourishing of life. So I then demonstrated that this understanding of security united the demands of various precarious groups in Polish society and encouraged the rethinking of the very practices through which security was meant to be achieved. And what is also interesting is that security provision was now done by local as well as transnational feminist groups, which began offering various forms of assistance to women in need of abortion services. And in so doing, feminist civil society actors attempted to substitute the state as a primary security provider. This idea in particular was encapsulated into the slogan, which was particularly remarkable. So when the state doesn't protect me, my sisters will. So my conclusion was that the feminist politics of security was therefore grounded in different principles, in the principles of reciprocity, equality, and solidarity.
Oh, thank you. So for those who might be listening to this interview who want to learn more and actually go away and read the article, what would you say are the main takeaways from it?
Well, the main takeaway is that I ask scholars should refrain from perhaps establishing a master narrative about how populists construct insecurity and the implications this has for feminist politics. Avoiding such generalized assumptions would help us to actually would encourage us to go look at how agents on the ground experience populism and perhaps also practice it. I also argued that feminist resistance to right-wing populism may not necessarily be anti-populist or desecuritizing for that matter, but may actually bring about an alternative politics of security that could still retain some elements of populism while transforming others. And as a result, both populism and security can undergo significant transformation and even create an opening for feminist empowerment. So overall, more contextual and feminist investigations are needed into how various grassroots agents may come together to lay claim to security in the name of the people. And finally, I would like to also emphasize that scholars must be open to the possibility that situated actors may, after all, creatively reinvent the relationship between populism, security, and feminism. Yeah.
Well, it's a very interesting area of research, and we're very grateful to you for sharing this with us. So thank you very much. For those of you who are keen to learn more, you can read Bohdana's full article in the first few section of the RIS website. If you are a BISA member, you can access this completely free of charge as part of your membership. You just need to log on to your account and it's all there. If you're not a BISA member, you might want to see if you can gain access via your institution. And while you are here, please do look at the BISA website, www.bisa.ac.uk. You can learn lots more about our association and all the wonderful benefits a BISA membership will bring you. So please do take a look. And with that, thank you once again, Bohdana. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much, Juliet. It's been a joy speaking to you.
And that's it. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.